Sage of the Shadows, where dark whispers echo through the night.
Audio story, Blood Twins. Chapter 7, Echoes in Crimson Silence. Shadows stretched long across the concrete floor, swallowing Arina's figure as she melted into the darkness. Her body was taut, every muscle coiled, ready to spring. Yet, she held herself back, savoring the tension, the anticipation. The air hung thick with the scent of fear, a sweet promise of the chaos she was about to unleash. She could feel it seeping from the walls, feeding her hunger. Her lips curled as her eyes glinted in the dim light. She listened, the shuffle of boots, the hum of a radio, the steady, oblivious rhythm of life that she was about to shatter. These men, these self-righteous cowards hiding behind silver, fire and stakes. They told themselves they were saving humanity, purging evil from the world. But Arina knew the truth, they weren't heroes. They were killers. They killed because it made them feel powerful. Because it let them forget their own smallness in the face of the unknown. She'd seen them in action before, dragging witches to pyres, chasing werewolves through forests, branding any creature they feared as a monster. And yet, here they stood, oblivious to the monster lurking among them now. The first hunter was an easy target, his posture careless, his attention absorbed in his radio. He had no idea that death stalked him. Arina moved silently. The dagger in her hand gleamed, thirsty. With a sudden flash, it sliced through his throat, clean and effortless. His eyes widened, shock consuming him as blood gurgled from the wound. He was already gone before his body hit the floor. The first kill was always the cleanest. But the rush of power, the warmth of his blood staining her hands, was intoxicating. Her pulse quickened as her senses sharpened, feeding off the energy of the hunt. Control, dominance, the end of his story written by her hand. She could never tire of it. She stalked forward, deliberate now, letting the remaining hunters sense her presence. She wanted them to hear her, to feel her coming, to know they were prey. Fear was its own weapon, and she wielded it mercilessly. The second hunter spun around, his stake raised, his eyes sharp with arrogance. He thought he was prepared. He thought he had a chance. Arina smiled. She circled him, her movements languid, teasing. She let him lunge, let him strike wildly. Each swing met nothing but empty air as she danced just out of reach. The frustration in his eyes ignited something primal within her. "Come on," she taunted, her voice low and mocking. "Show me how brave you are. Isn't that what you tell yourselves? That you're saving the world?" His eyes flared at her words. And she laughed, a sharp, wicked sound that sliced through the room. "You think I'm the monster here? Look at you." She dodged another swing, her smile growing. "You don't even know how pathetic you look, trying to pretend this is justice." She could feel his desperation mounting, his fears slipping through the cracks of his arrogance. Faster, angrier, he fought like a man drowning, clawing for a lifeline that wasn't there. When his breath hitched and his stance faltered, she struck. Her dagger slipped between his ribs. His gasp was sharp, choked. She leaned in, twisting the blade deeper as his body sagged against her. "You're nothing but a coward," she whispered. "Just like the rest." His eyes dimmed as she stepped over him, already searching for the next hunter. The pulse of adrenaline pounded in her veins. Each beat sang with hunger, driving her forward. She wanted more, needed more. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Two more. She turned, already tasting their fear. The first, a brute with a silver blade, charged her without hesitation. He thought strength would save him. She let him swing, let his blade screech against hers in a shower of sparks. The clash of metal rang through the air, splitting the stillness like a scream. She drove her knee into his gut, sending him reeling. But she didn't press the attack. Not yet. She wanted him to feel the futility first. The second hunter took aim with a crossbow, his eyes calculating. He believed he could end her. She saw it in the set of his jaw, the focus in his stance. He was so sure, so certain, and so wrong. She moved. The bolt hissed past her, embedding in the crate behind her with a dull thud. She was on him before he could reload, her dagger plunging deep into his chest. "You think I don't know what you are?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. You hunt us because it makes you feel strong. Because it lets you pretend you're not afraid. His hands clawed at her arm, but his strength was fading. Futile. Useless. She twisted the blade free, and he crumpled. Lifeless. And then there was one left. The leader stood at the far end of the warehouse, silver blade gleaming in the dim light. He was different. Calm. Unflinching. No fear clouded his gaze. He met hers and smirked. "Well, aren't you a nightmare?" he said, his tone laced with mockery. "You enjoying yourself?" Arina didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her dagger caught the faint moonlight as she advanced, her movements fluid. The hunger in her eyes sharpened. He raised his blade, that smug smile still playing at his lips. She struck, her dagger flashing toward his throat. He blocked. Arina let him believe he was keeping up, let him feel the hope building with each near miss. Her movements flowed like water, a dance of death, each step pushing him closer to breaking. "Is this justice to you?" he spat, his voice rising with frustration. "Butcher." Arina's grip tightened. "Justice?" She drove him back, step by step, her voice cutting deeper than her blade. "You think this world needs people like you? Men who burn witches, drown wolves and stake vampires." He tried to retort, but she was already closing in. She saw the cracks forming, the hesitation, the uncertainty. He swung, desperate, but she caught his wrist in a vice grip and twisted. His blade clattered to the ground. "You're not even close," she whispered, venom dripping from her words. His eyes flickered with fear as she shoved him to the ground, pinning him there. Her dagger sank deep into his shoulder, and he cried out, the sound satisfying in its rawness. "Where's your base?" she demanded, her voice a low growl. He laughed weakly, blood trickling from his lips. "You think you're righteous?" Her grip tightened, fury igniting. "No." The word came out sharp, dangerous. She drove the blade deeper, forcing another cry from him. "Answer my question." He hesitated, his defiance flickering like a dying flame. Finally, he growled, "The old mill." Arina studied him, her gaze piercing. She found no deceit. He was telling the truth. Without hesitation, she drove the hilt of her dagger against his temple. He slumped, unconscious. She stood over him, her breath heavy, her pulse thrumming with the aftermath of the hunt. The satisfaction lingered, heady and sweet. She had broken them all. And still, she wanted more. The docks were cloaked in a heavy mist, the kind that clung to the ground like an unwelcome specter, muffling sound and blurring the edges of reality. The air was thick with the scent of saltwater, mingling with the faint metallic tang of blood. The distant hum of machinery underscored the silence between Arina's steps, her blade still slick with crimson swinging loosely at her side. She walked away from the warehouse, her figure swallowed by the fog, leaving behind the body of the hunter's leader. He lay discarded like a broken rag doll, his final words still echoing in her mind. The old mill, their base. Her heart pounded, but not with the adrenaline of the fight. It was the raw, unrelenting burn of rage. It consumed her, choking out reason and leaving her with only the driving need to destroy. To erase them. They had left scars, stolen lives, and for that, they would pay. Piece by piece, she would tear their world apart until only ash remained. Her boots left faint red smudges against the weathered wood of the docks, a trail that faded into the fog. The wind carried the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore, a cruelly serene backdrop to the chaos she had unleashed. But Arina did not stop. She couldn't. Each step was heavier than the last, her thoughts spiraling between vengeance and the faint, bitter sting of guilt she refused to acknowledge. The sudden sound of footsteps shattered her solitude. Instinctively, she tightened her grip on her blade. The fog seemed to press closer, the tension crackling like static in the air. Togi emerged first, his figure slicing through the mist with an air of authority that could not be ignored. His long coat billowed faintly behind him, his steps unhurried yet purposeful. Behind him were 4 others, vampires, she realized instantly. Even in the dim light, their presence was palpable, their movements precise and controlled. These were no ordinary vampires, they were soldiers, each one a force in their own right. Arina's gaze locked with Togi's as he approached. For a brief, fleeting moment, worry flickered across her expression. She'd made a calculated gamble back at his family's estate, playing the part of the unassuming guest, far removed from the blood-soaked warrior she truly was. But the mask already had been ripped away, and there was no hiding the truth. Togi had seen her handiwork, her unrestrained fury. And worse, he didn't look pleased. For the first time, she felt the weight of his presence, not just as a leader but as someone who had survived and thrived in the brutal games of power their kind played. His steps, his gaze, even the faint tilt of his head spoke of control. He wasn't just dangerous, he was calculating. Togi's sharp eyes swept over the scene. The warehouse looming in the background, the blood smeared on her clothes, and the lifeless body of the hunter's leader. The mist seemed to hold its breath as Togi's gaze finally locked onto hers, unyielding and sharp. For a moment, he said nothing, but the weight of his silence was heavier than words. It wasn't just the blood on her hands or the trail of destruction she'd left behind that held his attention, it was her. Impressive, he said finally, his tone devoid of praise but laced with something colder. You fooled them, my family. His head tilted slightly, like a predator sizing up prey that had dared to bite back. But not me. Nobody manages to enter the city without us noticing unless they know what they're doing. Arina's lips pressed into a thin line. The urge to retort burned hot on her tongue, but she swallowed it. He wasn't wrong, and worse, he knew it. And of course, I remember our fight, he continued, his voice dropping an octave, his eyes narrowing. Brutal. Precise. Most wouldn't have lasted a minute, but you. His words trailed off as his gaze scanned her, like he was still weighing her strength, testing her resolve without so much as moving a muscle. You knew exactly what you were doing. And you thought that pretending to be fragile, would convince me? Her jaw clenched, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. The ghost of that memory flickered in Arina's mind. It had been a long time since she fought someone like him. Someone who didn't crumble under her ferocity but matched it. No wonder she had made a mistake, underestimated his endurance. Yet even in losing, she had left her mark. She had injured him, she knew it. That thought didn't make the loss any less bitter, but it soothed some of the sting. So, tell me, Togi said, his voice smooth but edged with steel, are you here to finish what you started, or is this chaos your idea of diplomacy? Arina squared her shoulders, matching his intensity. You assume I'm here for either. Maybe I'm just here to clean up a mess no one else has the stomach to deal with. Togi's lips twitched, though it wasn't quite a smile. Quite the mess, he said, his tone cool but carrying an undertone of irritation. In my city, no less. Arina's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral, lifting her blade and wiping it clean with deliberate slowness. I don't recall asking for your permission to clean house. Togi's jaw tightened slightly, though his composure didn't crack. You've been stirring up problems. Each word landed with deliberate weight, like the toll of a bell. This city has rules. My family's rules. Everything that happens here is our business. And you've done enough to get my attention. Her lips curled into a faint, mocking smile. The hunters are the problem, not me, and I'm not stopping until they're wiped out. Togi's eyes narrowed slightly, his tone dropping again. Colder now, more dangerous. This city doesn't work on your terms, Arina. You think you can walk in here, start tearing things apart, and leave when it suits you? It's not that simple. The mist swirled around them, curling at their feet as if drawn to the storm brewing between them. Arina's gaze flicked briefly to the others behind him, Cain, broad and brooding. Corvin, whose sharp eyes carried a hint of amusement. Elias, quiet but watchful, and Irina, her gaze cold and appraising. Strangers. Irrelevant. Her focus remained on Togi, the one whose authority could not be ignored. Her voice sharpened, cutting through the fog. I don't care about your rules, Togi. The hunters made this personal. I'm done waiting for them to make the next move. Togi's expression hardened, his tone edged with quiet authority. I get it. You want revenge. But starting a war with the hunters in my city? Irina stepped forward then, her eyes narrowing. You're still alive because Togi allows it, she said smoothly, her voice cutting. Don't forget that. Arina's smirk deepened, her gaze flicking to Irina. And you're still talking because I let you. Corvin chuckled under his breath, the sound low and sardonic. She's quick, he remarked, his sharp eyes glinting with amusement. Irina shot him a glare that could freeze fire, but Corvin didn't so much as flinch. The unspoken dynamics of the group were clear. Togi commanded absolute loyalty, but within that loyalty, there were layers. And then there was Arina, an outsider, a disruption none of them seemed quite sure what to do with. Togi didn't acknowledge the exchange, his eyes never leaving Arina. "You've got their base location, didn't you?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "So, what now? You think you can march in there alone and destroy it?" For a moment, Arina seemed surprised. He really knew what he was talking about, but she wasn't about to let him intimidate her. Arina's response was instant, her tone cutting. "I don't need your help." Corvin raised an eyebrow, his tone skeptical but faintly amused. "That's ambitious. You think you can take down an entire hunter base by yourself?" Her gaze snapped to him, unwavering. "If you've got a better idea, I'm listening." Elias, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "The hunters won't go down easily. They've been hunting us for years. You think they don't have traps? You walk into that base alone, and they'll kill you." Arina's expression hardened, her posture rigid. "I don't need to be saved." Irina folded her arms, her tone dripping with disdain. "Then why are we even having this conversation? Let her march to her death if that's what she wants." Togi's voice cut through, soft but sharp as steel. "No one's saving you, Arina. But you're not the only one with a score to settle against the hunters." He took a step closer, his tone steady, deliberate. "If you want to take them down, you'll need us. On our terms." A flicker of unease crossed Arina's face, so brief it was barely there. His offer wasn't born of altruism, that much was clear. He wanted something, needed something, and she didn't trust him. But she wasn't foolish enough to dismiss the advantage of numbers. Corvin leaned slightly toward Irina, his voice a quiet murmur meant to be overheard. "Looks like the boss is playing the long game. Smart." Irina didn't respond, her jaw tight as she glared at Arina. "And what's your angle?" Arina asked, her voice low, controlled. "Why are you so interested in helping me?" Togi's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "You'll find out soon enough. For now, focus on what matters. We're going after the hunters, but we do it together, or not at all." Elias nodded silently, his gaze flicking toward Togi, while Corvin smirked faintly, as though the idea of watching this partnership unfold amused him. Irina, however, didn't bother to hide her displeasure, her icy glare aimed squarely at Arina. Arina held Togi's gaze for a long moment before nodding once, her voice clipped. "Fine." Togi inclined his head, a faint glimmer of respect in his eyes, though his expression remained guarded. Then he turned sharply, signaling for his group to follow. Arina stood still for a moment. It was clear she didn't trust them. She knew all too well from experience that other vampires couldn't be trusted. Yet, after only a moment of hesitation, she found herself following in their footsteps.